At the school assembly, whispers echoed through the auditorium. That's just the janitor's kid. I sat in the back row, my own hands clenched tight in my lap, a counterpoint to the nervous flutter in my chest. My heart, a leaden weight, seemed to sink with every murmur that snaked its way through the rows of students and their parents. I watched Leo, my son, my everything, standing near the edge of the stage. He adjusted his tie, a simple, dark blue one we'd picked out together, his fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. He had heard those words before, countless times, etched into the soundtrack of his school life. He'd felt their sting, the casual cruelty that children, and sometimes their parents, could inflict without a second thought. But today, he'd insisted, today was different. He carried a quiet determination that I'd seen him cultivate, a fragile shield against the barbs. As Principal Thompson, a man whose stern face rarely softened, began his practiced introduction for the day's special guest, the heavy oak doors at the rear of the auditorium creaked open. A shaft of light sliced through the dimness, and in walked Mayor Davies, a man I'd only ever seen on local news, his smile broad and genuine, his posture radiating an easy confidence. And then I saw it, the detail that made the air freeze in my lungs, his hand, resting proudly, firmly, on my son's shoulder. Leo, my Leo, walking beside the mayor. The room, once a hive of hushed gossip and restless shuffling, fell into a profound, stunned silence. In that singular, stretched moment, titles and uniforms, the starched collar of the mayor and the worn fabric of my own work shirt, faded into insignificance. All that remained, shining and irrefutable, was the undeniable truth of my son's worth. They called him the janitor's kid, but they didn't know who he really was. They didn't see the hours he spent after school, not playing with friends, but with me, in these very halls. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I could feel hundreds of eyes, previously flicking towards Leo with dismissive curiosity, now locked onto him with a new, uncertain intensity. Principal Thompson, mid-sentence about civic duty, faltered. His voice caught, then trailed off into an awkward cough. His gaze darted from Leo to the mayor, then back to his notes, a flush creeping up his neck. I saw Mrs. Albright, head of the PDA and mother to a boy who'd once told Leo his hands probably smelled like trash, her perfectly painted mouth agape. Her son, Jason, sitting beside her, looked equally bewildered, his earlier smirk wiped clean from his face. My own breath hitched. I wanted to stand, to shout, to do something, but I was rooted to my plastic chair, a spectator to this unfolding drama that centered around my boy. The scuffed linoleum floor beneath my feet, a surface I knew intimately from countless nights spent polishing it, suddenly felt like hallowed ground. The faint scent of floor wax and old varnish, usually a comforting backdrop to my life, now seemed to carry the weight of this monumental shift. Mayor Davies, seemingly oblivious to the ripple of shock he created, guided Leo towards the front. His steps were measured, his smile unwavering. He didn't look like a politician maneuvering. He looked like a mentor, genuinely pleased to be there. Leo, bless his heart, walked with a newfound straightness in his spine. His earlier nervousness was still there. I could see it in the slight tension around his eyes, but it was overlaid with a quiet dignity that made my chest ache with pride. He wasn't just the janitor's kid anymore. He was someone important. I remembered when he was small, perhaps 7 or 8. School would let out, and he'd come find me, his little backpack slung over one shoulder, a smudge of paint or playground dirt on his cheek. "Can I help, Papa?" he'd ask, his voice bright, his eyes eager. Back then, the school was just a giant adventure playground after hours. He'd push a child-sized broom with comical seriousness, his tongue poking out in concentration as he tried to sweep a pile of dust into a pan, often sending more particles into the air than onto the metal. He'd help me empty wastebaskets, chattering about his day, about a new dinosaur fact he'd learned or a funny story a classmate had told. "See this, Leo?" I'd say, holding up a particularly grimy rag after wiping down a sticky lunch table. "This is honesty. This is taking care of things, making them right." He'd nod solemnly, not fully grasping the words, perhaps, but understanding the sincerity in my tone. He'd follow me as I moved my cart, its wheels squeaking a familiar rhythm down the long, empty corridors. The shadows would lengthen, casting long, dancing shapes from the trophy cases and the posters on the walls. Sometimes, he'd sit on a bench, doing his homework under the dim emergency lights while I mopped the gymnasium floor, the rhythmic slosh of the water in the bucket a comforting sound in the vast, echoing space. There was no shame then, only a simple, shared endeavor. He didn't see the disdain in the eyes of a late-staying teacher who hurried past without a word, or the way some parents would pull their children a little closer if they saw us leaving together late in the evening. He was just with his papa in the quiet kingdom of the after-hours school. The smell of disinfectant and old books was simply the smell of our time together. But as he grew, the innocence began to fray. The whispers started, subtle at first, then more direct. "Why does your dad clean the toilets?" a boy had asked him in 3rd grade, not with malice, perhaps, but with a child's blunt curiosity. Leo hadn't known how to answer. He'd come home that day with a cloud over his usually sunny face. "Papa," he'd asked, his voice small, "is your job bad?" I'd pulled him onto my lap, my heart twisting. "No, Leo," I'd said, stroking his hair. "There's no such thing as a bad job if it's honest work. I help keep the school clean and safe for you, for all the children, for the teachers. There's dignity in that, son. Always remember that." He'd seemed to accept it, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The world outside our small apartment, outside the quiet companionship of our evenings at the school, was starting to teach him a different lesson, a harsher one about status and perception. The mayor reached the podium, Leo still at his side. Principal Thompson, having regained some composure, stepped back with a forced smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, students," he announced, his voice a little too loud, "it seems our esteemed guest, Mayor Davies, has brought a guest of his own." "Mayor." Mayor Davies stepped forward, a warm smile gracing his lips. He adjusted the microphone slightly. "Thank you, Principal Thompson. Good morning, everyone." His voice was calm, resonant, filling the auditorium without effort. "I was indeed planning to come speak to you today about community engagement, about the power each of you has to make a difference in our city." He paused, then turned his gaze to Leo, his smile softening with genuine affection. "But I found out that someone in this very school is already doing just that, in a truly remarkable way. And I thought, instead of just talking about it, I'd bring an example. A shining example." He placed his hand on Leo's shoulder again. "This young man, Leo Maxwell," he said, his voice clear and proud, "has shown more initiative, more dedication, and more heart than many adults I know." A collective intake of breath seemed to ripple through the audience. Leo Maxwell. Not the janitor's kid. Leo Maxwell. My son. His name, spoken with such respect by the mayor, felt like a vindication. I saw Leo flush slightly, but he stood tall, his eyes fixed on a point at the back of the hall, perhaps looking for me. I wished I could send him a wave of reassurance of the immense, overflowing pride that was threatening to break me. The memory of the first subtle slight was still painfully vivid. Leo had been in 4th grade, invited to a classmate's birthday party. He'd been so excited, talking about it for weeks. We'd picked out a modest gift, a science kit he thought Michael would love. The day of the party, he put on his best shirt, his hair carefully combed. I walked him to Michael's house, a much larger home than ours, in a wealthier part of town. When Michael's mother opened the door, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second as she looked from Leo to me. "Oh," she'd said, her voice coolly polite. "Leo, you're Michael's friend." There was a slight emphasis on friend that made my stomach clench. "Yes, Mrs. Peterson. Thank you for inviting him," I'd replied, trying to keep my own voice even. Leo, oblivious, had beamed. "Happy birthday, Michael," he'd said, holding out the gift when Michael appeared. Michael had taken it, mumbled a thanks, then disappeared back into the house where sounds of laughter and games spilled out. Mrs. Peterson hadn't invited me in, hadn't even suggested I wait. It was a small thing, easily dismissed, but it was a clear signal. We were different. Leo was different. He came home a few hours later, much quieter than when he'd left. "How was the party? Sport?" I'd asked, trying to sound cheerful. He shrugged, picking at a loose thread on the sofa. "It was okay. Just okay." "Did you play games? Eat cake?" "Yeah." He paused. "Jason Albright was there. He asked me if I lived in a smelly apartment because you clean all day." My blood ran cold. Jason Albright, already learning his mother's disdain. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Nothing." Michael told him to shut up. But then, Michael didn't really play with me much after that. I pulled him close, the injustice of it a bitter pill. This was the beginning of it, the slow, cruel erosion of his childhood innocence by the casual prejudices of others. It was these moments, these pinpricks of social exclusion, that had built up over the years. The unreturned invitations, the whispers in the hallways he pretended not to hear, the way some teachers looked past him, their focus always on the children of doctors, lawyers, or business owners. My fear hadn't been for myself. I'd made my peace with my work long ago. My father, a stern but fair man, had taught me the value of any honest labor. Your hands might get dirty, son, he'd say, his own calloused from years on a factory floor, but your spirit stays clean if your work is true. I believed that. My fear was for Leo. I saw the shadow of those judgments dimming his bright spirit, making him hesitant, self-conscious. I worried that the weight of my perceived station in life would become an anchor, holding him back from his own potential. I felt a constant, gnawing guilt, wondering if my choices, my life, were somehow limiting his. But Leo had a resilience I hadn't anticipated, a quiet strength that seemed to bloom in the face of adversity. Perhaps it was those evenings spent with me, watching the quiet dignity of my work, or perhaps it was an innate part of his gentle soul. He never complained, not really. He just absorbed it, and somehow found a way to keep shining. Mayor Davies continued, Leo, here, has been spearheading a project called Greenwood Revival. Perhaps some of you have heard of it. A few hesitant murmurs, a couple of uncertain nods. Not many. Of course not. It wasn't the sort of project that made headlines, not until now. For the past year, the mayor explained, his tone warm and engaging, Leo has dedicated his afternoons, his weekends, his own time, to cleaning up and revitalizing the old Greenwood Park near the creek. That park, as many of you adults will remember, had become an eyesore, a place people avoided. My mind flashed to the countless hours. After finishing his homework, often at the small, wobbly desk in his room, or sometimes still at the school while I finished my rounds, he'd pack a small bag. Old gloves, a trowel I'd found for him, heavy-duty trash bags. He'd bike over to Greenwood Park, a forgotten patch of land that had become overgrown with weeds, littered with broken bottles and discarded rubbish. At first, I'd been worried. It wasn't the safest part of town. Leo, are you sure about this? I'd asked him one evening when he came back, mud-streaked and tired, but with a strange light in his eyes. Papa, it's awful, he'd said, his voice earnest. There's so much trash. In the old rose bushes, the ones Grandma told me about, they're all choked by weeds. I think I can make it better. His grandmother, my late wife, had loved that park as a child. She told Leo stories of picnics under the big oak tree and the scent of wild roses in the summer. That connection, I realized, was part of his motivation. He was trying to reclaim a piece of her memory, a piece of forgotten beauty. So, I'd helped where I could. On my days off, I'd go with him. We'd fill bag after bag with refuse. I taught him how to safely handle sharp objects, how to identify invasive plants. Slowly, painstakingly, a small section of the park began to transform. He cleared a patch around the old, gnarled oak tree, uncovering a forgotten stone bench. He meticulously weeded around the struggling rose bushes, coaxing them back to life. He even managed to convince Mr. Henderson, the grumpy owner of the local hardware store, to donate a few bags of mulch and some flower seeds. This kid, Mr. Henderson, had grumbled to me one day when I went to pick up some supplies, though there was a grudging respect in his eyes. He's relentless. Comes in every week, polite as can be, asking for advice, showing me pictures of his progress on that little phone of his. Can't say no to that kind of dedication. Leo had faced discouragement. One week, he arrived at the park to find a section he'd just cleared littered with fresh trash, a discarded tire tossed onto the new mulch. I remember him coming home that day, his shoulders slumped, his eyes dull with disappointment. What's the point, Papa? He'd asked, his voice barely a whisper. I clean it up, and they just mess it up again. My heart ached for him. I sat him down, just as I had when he was smaller. Leo, I said, change is hard. Making something better takes time, and it takes persistence. Not everyone will appreciate it right away. Some people are careless, or they don't see the value in what you're doing. But that doesn't mean you stop. It means you keep going, because you see the value. You know it's right. I reminded him of the first few wildflowers he'd managed to coax into bloom, of the elderly couple who'd started taking their morning walks through the cleared path, thanking him each time they saw him. He'd listened, his brow furrowed in thought. The next day, he was back at the park, his resolve, if anything, even stronger. He'd even made a small, hand-painted sign, "Please help keep our park clean." Thank you. The mayor was now detailing some of Leo's specific achievements. He's organized 2 community cleanup days, rallying a handful of volunteers. He's planted over 50 native saplings and wildflowers. He's even petitioned the city council, yes, this young man right here, for better lighting and more frequent trash collection for the area. And he did it all with his own initiative, driven by a desire to make his community a better place. My gaze drifted to Leo. He was looking down at his scuffed sneakers, a shy smile playing on his lips. Those sneakers. I remembered buying them for him last fall. He'd needed new ones for months, but we'd waited until I got a small overtime payment. They were sturdy, practical, nothing fancy. Now, they bore the marks of his labor, streaks of mud, a small tear near the toe. They were a testament to his hard work, more honorable than any pair of expensive, pristine shoes in that auditorium. How had the mayor found out? Leo, in his quiet, persistent way, had written a letter. A carefully composed, handwritten letter to the mayor's office, outlining the problems at Greenwood Park and detailing his efforts and his hopes for its future. He hadn't told me about it until he got a reply, a formal, typed letter inviting him to a brief meeting with one of the mayor's aides. He'd been so nervous that day. What if they think it's silly, Papa? A kid trying to tell them how to run a park? They'll see your passion, Leo, I'd assured him, though my own heart was pounding with a mix of hope and anxiety. Just tell them what you told me. Speak from your heart. Apparently, the aide had been impressed enough to bring it to Mayor Davies' attention. And the mayor, a man who often spoke about grassroots community efforts, had decided to see for himself. He visited Greenwood Park unannounced one Saturday morning. Leo was there, of course, tending to his saplings. Leo told me about it later, his eyes wide with disbelief. He just walked up, Papa. Mayor Davies. He asked me what I was doing, and I told him. We talked for almost an hour. He even helped me plant one of the little trees. That was when the idea of the assembly had come up. The mayor had been genuinely moved by Leo's dedication, by his quiet commitment in the face of neglect. He'd seen, perhaps, what I saw every day, a young man of incredible character. The mayor was winding down his introduction. So, when I thought about who truly embodies the spirit of civic engagement, of making a positive impact, I couldn't think of a better person to highlight than Leo Maxwell. He didn't wait for someone else to solve a problem. He saw a need, and he acted. He is, in the truest sense of the word, a community leader. He turned to Leo. Leo, would you like to say a few words? A hush fell over the auditorium. All eyes were on my son. I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes, and my stomach tightened. He hadn't expected this. He was brave, my Leo, but public speaking in front of the entire school, with the mayor beside him, was a monumental task. He glanced towards me, a quick, searching look. I tried to pour all my love, all my belief in him, into my gaze. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Asterisk, you can do this, son. Star. He took a deep breath, his shoulders squaring. He stepped up to the microphone, which Mayor Davies adjusted down for him with another encouraging smile. Leo began, his voice a little shaky but clear. Thank you, Mayor Davies. And thank you, everyone. He paused, nervously licking his lips. The silence was absolute. Even the usual rustling and coughing had ceased. I just saw that the park was messy, he continued, his voice gaining a little strength. And I remembered my grandma telling me how nice it used to be. I thought, maybe I could help make it nice again. For her. And for everyone who lives nearby. He looked down for a moment, then back up, his gaze sweeping across the students. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes it felt like too much work, or like nobody cared. But then I'd see a new flower bloom, or someone would stop and say thank you, and it made me want to keep going. His eyes found mine again, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips. My papa always taught me that any work that helps people or makes things better is good work, and that you should always try your best, no matter what. My throat constricted. Tears pricked at my eyes, hot and insistent. I blinked them back fiercely, not wanting to miss a second of this. He wasn't just talking about the park, he was talking about us, about the lessons I'd tried to impart, the values I'd hoped he'd carry. So, I just want to say that even if you're just one person, you can still make a difference. If you see something that needs fixing, or something that could be better, you can try. That's all. He stepped back, a wave of relief washing over his face. It wasn't a grand speech, no soaring rhetoric. It was simple, honest, and profoundly moving. It was Leo. A beat of silence, and then it started. Not from the teachers, not from the mayor, but from a student near the front. A slow, deliberate clap. Then another joined in, then a few more. Within seconds, the entire auditorium erupted in applause. It wasn't polite, dutiful applause. It was loud, genuine, sustained. Students were on their feet, cheering. Teachers were smiling, clapping enthusiastically. I saw Principal Thompson, his earlier awkwardness gone, clapping vigorously, a look of genuine admiration on his face. Mrs. Albright, beside him, was also clapping, her expression unreadable but no longer dismissive. Her son, Jason, looked stunned, then slowly, almost reluctantly, began to clap too. Mayor Davies put his arm around Leo's shoulders, beaming. Leo looked overwhelmed, a blush creeping up his neck, but there was a radiant happiness in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long, long time. He had faced down the whispers, the judgments, not with anger or confrontation, but with quiet action, with unwavering integrity. And now, in this moment, he was being seen, truly seen. The applause went on for what felt like an eternity. I stayed in my seat in the back row, unseen, unimportant to the crowd, but my heart was soaring. The weight that had sat on my chest for so long, the fear and the guilt, began to lift. My son, my brave, good son. He had found his own voice, his own way. As the applause finally began to subside, Mayor Davies spoke again. "Thank you, Leo. An inspiration to us all." He then briefly spoke about the city's new youth volunteer initiatives, tying it back to Leo's example. But it was clear that Leo was the true focus of the day. When the assembly was dismissed, the atmosphere was entirely different. There was a buzz and excitement. Students were talking animatedly, many of them looking towards Leo with open admiration, some with a dawning respect. I watched as a few of his classmates, kids who had previously ignored him or offered only polite, distant nods, approached him tentatively. "Hey, Leo," one of them said, a boy named Sam who was on the soccer team. "That was really cool." "About the park." "Thanks, Sam," Leo replied, a little shy but pleased. Another student, a girl from his science class, added, "I live near Greenwood. It really does look a lot better. My mom was saying so just the other day." I saw Mrs. Davison, Leo's English teacher, make her way towards him. She was a kind woman, one of the few who had always treated Leo with consistent warmth and encouragement. She placed a hand on his arm, her eyes shining. "Leo, I am so incredibly proud of you." "That was wonderful." Leo beamed at her. "Thank you, Mrs. Davison. You always told me my writing could make a difference." She smiled. "And you proved it, dear. You certainly proved it." I began to make my way out, wanting to give Leo his moment, but also eager to see him, to hug him. As I neared the exit, moving along the wall, trying to be inconspicuous, Principal Thompson intercepted me. "Mr. Maxwell," he said, extending his hand. His handshake was firm, his expression serious, but with a new light in his eyes. I must say, your son is an exceptional young man. We're very proud to have him at Northwood High." "Thank you, Principal Thompson," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm proud of him too." It was a small acknowledgement, but it felt significant. The principal, who had perhaps, like many others, only seen Leo through the lens of my profession, was now seeing him as an individual, a leader. I finally caught Leo's eye as he started to move towards the exit, surrounded by a small group of well-wishers, including the mayor who was shaking his hand one last time before being escorted away by an aide. When Leo saw me, his face lit up. He excused himself and hurried over, his steps light, almost bouncing. He didn't say anything. He just threw his arms around me in a fierce hug, right there in the crowded hallway, amidst the departing students and teachers. I held him tight, my eyes stinging again. "I'm so proud of you, Leo," I whispered into his hair, my voice choked. So proud." "Thanks, Papa," he mumbled against my shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you." We walked out of the school together, into the bright morning sunshine. The air felt cleaner, the world a little brighter. The shadows that had often clung to my perception of this place, the place of my labor and his learning, seemed to have receded. Later that day, after my shift, I went to pick him up. He was talking with a group of students near the bike racks, laughing. Not the quiet, reserved chuckle I was used to, but a full, open laugh. As I approached, one of the boys, one I didn't recognize, clapped Leo on the shoulder. "See you tomorrow, Maxwell. Maybe some of us can come help at the park on Saturday." "Yeah, that'd be great," Leo said, his face alight. He saw me and waved, grabbing his backpack. As we walked home, side by side, just as we had countless times before, there was a new ease in his stride, a new confidence in the set of his shoulders. The weight he had carried, the unspoken burden of being the janitor's kid, seemed to have been lifted, replaced by the quiet assurance of his own proven worth. He was still my Leo, thoughtful and kind, but something had shifted. He stood taller, not just physically, but in spirit. I looked at him, my son, walking beside me, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows behind us. The whispers might not vanish entirely, prejudice rarely does. But now, they would be tempered by a new understanding, a new respect. He had shown them who he was, not by shouting, but by doing, by caring, by leading. They called him the janitor's kid, but now they see the leader he's become. And in my heart, I knew this was just the beginning for him. My boy, Leo, who taught me as much about courage and dignity as I ever taught him. My son, no longer defined by my job, but by the remarkable person he was, and the even more remarkable man he was growing up to be. My eyes glistened, not with sorrow this time, but with a profound, quiet pride that filled me to bursting. He was, quite simply, my everything. And today, the world had finally caught a glimpse of why.